It is debatable, but you can definitely make the argument that Teemo might be the most hated video game character of all time. He's unusual in that back in early seasons of League, Riot had this crusade against what they called anti-fun champions and mechanics. If a character, item, or playstyle was frustrating to play against, then Riot would make it a point to say that's a problem we need to fix. This ranged from removing items they didn't believe to be healthy for the long-term success of the game, to reworking entire characters. Any champion with a kit that might seem too uninteractive or annoying would be reworked into a more dynamic experience that wasn't just fun to play as, but at least tolerable to play against. But not Teemo. When Teemo was first released in 2009, he was almost immediately panned as the most annoying character in-game. But as frustrating as he was, Riot seemingly doubled down on the idea that this is just his identity. Being a champion that drives you mad is just who he is, and for these last 10 years, he's remained functionally the exact same, receiving almost nothing but buffs to keep his ancient kit somewhat viable. Traditionally, there's only ever been one respite from Teemo's wrath, which ironically is professional play. Paradoxically, the things that make Teemo such a good character in solo queue, like solid harass, good 1v1s, and mushroom minefields, well, those are actually pretty easy to take care of in a professional setting, as Teemo becomes more of a liability than an asset in a coordinated environment. It seems as though this high level of play is the one and only place the devil has never seen, except for a few instances when he's reared his ugly head. It hasn't happened often, but every once in a while we'll see one of League's top pros choose to dance with the devil, using his power to not just annoy solo queue stars, but to try and make the lives of their fellow professionals miserable too. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't, but today we're going to go through each and every circumstance when a person has tried to do it. This is the competitive history of League's most hated champion. But first, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing I value above all else in life, you guys know it's fashion. And as an authority on the subject, let me tell you there is nothing less fashionable than walking around with a big, bulky wallet bulging out of your pockets, but thankfully there's a modern solution for that, the Ridge wallet. The Ridge is a sleek, light, industrial wallet designed to be way more durable, yet easier to carry around than whatever you're stuck with right now. It holds up to 12 cards, all your cash, and comes with a lifetime guarantee, truly a buy-it-for-life item. I love that kind of thing. It makes a surprisingly good holiday gift for yourself or someone you care about. I mean, it's certainly the kind of gift someone's going to get a lot of use out of, and nobody ever thinks to buy themselves an upgraded wallet. If you go to ridge.com/gbay99 today, you can get 10% off your order and free worldwide shipping and free returns. Just make sure to use code gbay99 at checkout. A link is in the description, and thanks again to Ridge for sponsoring this video. The story of competitive Teemo really begins with a single individual from a very well-known team, the Rainman, who was the first ever top laner for TSM. Rainman was an early League pro known for his innovative top lane picks, as well as his out-there Bay-life personality that garnered him, as well as TSM, a large part of their early following. He was the first pro who tried to bring Teemo into the forefront of League's competitive scene when he began maining the champion and eventually climbed all the way up to rank 1 on the solo queue ladder with him in 2011. He also encouraged others to check out the character's playstyle when he began populating a YouTube channel with plenty of highlights from his climb up the ladder, stylized with his eccentric personality. This was the first circumstance where we saw a pro player harness the devil's power like this, which was much more effective in earlier seasons. Back in Season 1, when champions didn't have as many gap closers, utility, tankiness, and damage like we see today, Teemo was actually a pretty effective pick. When comboed with Flash and Ignite, he could outdamage most of the other meta top lanes with surprisingly good DPS, meaning if you wanted to implore that classic win lane, win game mentality, then he was a solid option. I'm sure Rainman first picked Teemo competitively in one of League's many early online events, tournaments like the Go for LOL series, which have a very important part of League's early history, but sadly it seems as though all VODs and match histories from those events have been lost to time. game. The first recorded instance that we have of Teemo being picked was when Rainman decided to pull him out at the Season 1 World Championship. At this point in the event, TSM had just been knocked down into losers bracket where they were about to face off against Epic Gamer, captained by Reginald's brother Dandin and featuring future TSM stars Dyrus and Doublelift. TSM had managed to take Game 1 in the best-of-3 series, where if they could just win Game 2, they would be guaranteed a top 3 finish. In Champion Select of this Game 2, TSM saw Dyrus lock in Singe top lane, who he had been having success with all tournament long. Well, Teemo's a pretty strong counterpick to Singe, so Rainman would lock the champion in, getting us our first recorded instance of Teemo being used in pro play.
Watts here helping his team out with the pick.
Do it, Rainman, do it.
Oh, wow.
Yes!
And oh, poor Dyrus.
You don't ever
Up
outjump.
top, we got Dyrus taking a lot of damage. It could be first blood here. The flash in by Teemo, and it is going to be the fling. He did not save himself. And yeah, great job there as Rainman. Teemo able to pick up the first kill, and we'll see by TSM that they were in a terrible position. Nobody was on the map. Look, the Rainman just kind of taking top lane over by himself. It's going to be a port in from the Destiny ultimate coming out of the hands of Reginald. They should be able to take down Westrice here, and a very nice job catching Westrice. Understanding the timing of how Annie wanted to do that. Salsi taken down by the hands of Rainman, and it looks like this fight is actually going in favor of Team Solo Mid. Dyrus looks like he could go down here. He will continue to do the damage he can until the fight happens, and a very nice job. 4 down for Epic Gaming at this time, as Team Solo Mid may have just turned the tide of this game.
Rainman destroyed this match, getting a final scoreline of 14-2-9. In the post-game interview that followed, Reginald gave a bit of insight into what went down when TSM saw the Singe pick.
The Teemo thing was kind of like on the moment, heat of the moment. We're just like, oh, what should we land against Singe to on him? And we're like, oh, okay, let's get Teemo. Because Rainman's always like, hey, Teemo's the best.
Later on in that event, Rainman would pick Teemo again when facing against All Authority in the losers finals, where he would play him as an AD carry into Vayne bot lane, which is something we would start to see a few times throughout League's history, Teemo being used as a counter to AD carries, since he can essentially make them useless for a few seconds, unable to auto-attack from his blind. But here, it didn't work out super well, as TSM lost the game and the series, getting eliminated with a 3rd place finish. Although TSM didn't get first overall, this was still a beautiful moment for Teemo mains across the world, in that they got to see their devil destroy the hearts and souls of pro players on the world stage. He was no longer just a weird niche playstyle contained only to solo queue. Now you might run into Teemo literally anywhere. Although he was basically the only pro playing him, Rainman continued championing Teemo in later tournaments as he seemingly took up the torch for the Teemo mains crusade across the world. The next event he pulled him out at was IEM Season 6 Kiev, where here Rainman would use Teemo as an effective counterpick weapon against 2 Aurelia players. He first countered an Aurelia when facing SK Gaming's Kevin, where he went 2-1-7 in this group stage match, only managing to top his performance in the semifinals shortly thereafter, where he countered Dignitas's Voyboy, getting a perfect 3-0-4 scoreline. This sent TSM into the grand finals, where they would narrowly lose a 2-1 series against Moscow 5, although it's worth mentioning these were the only games they dropped the whole event. As much as people like to hate Teemo, Rainman was a really fun pro to see use him. To have a top player in the world on one of the best teams out there use this weird pocket pick that literally nobody else even wanted to try, and to see him win the majority of his games with him, that was really cool to see. Rainman had a few creative picks he liked to play alongside Teemo, and was a fan favorite on TSM for a while, although he wouldn't stay with the team long. Early on into Season 2, TSM would choose to replace him with Dyrus after a disagreement about practice regimens. After that, Rainman all but retired from professional League. TSM would be the only team he ever really played for, as the rest of his pro League career only consisted of substituting in for a couple of teams at a few events afterward. Years later, he would make headlines in the League scene for some controversial solo queue decisions when streaming the game, and would get banned as the community soured on him and his personality a bit. But even today, he still makes content online, running a YouTube channel where he plays Mountain Blade, Kenshi, RimWorld, and occasionally League of Legends, postmarked by his signature champion. Back when he first left TSM though, it seemed as though Teemo fans had lost a knight in their crusade for competitive relevancy, as nobody else had the courage, or maybe the heartlessness, to pick Teemo top lane again for years. In fact, if we just look at the instances when he was played top lane in international tournaments or top regional leagues, what are sometimes called premier events, nobody would even attempt to use Teemo top again for almost half a decade. Teemo would see a bit of a revival in the mid and bot lanes the following seasons as a full AP champion who was a bit of a flexible option for the lane swap meta that emerged. Azubu Blaze's ambition would get a perfect KDA with him in the Champions 2013 Spring Split, although those early years of the Korean League had their VODs wiped a while back, meaning we have no footage of this glorious first game of Korean Teemo dominance. Beyond that, Chawi from the Singapore Sentinels would actually use him to great effect 3 times in the GPL 2014 winter season, where although he'd win his lanes very hard almost every game, he'd be unable to carry SGS, only getting a 1-2 score line with the character overall. As time went on, Teemo slowly began fading into irrelevancy, as fewer and fewer players even bothered trying to use him. He wasn't alone in that, though. This was a trend we started to see with all of League's older champions, which eventually got made worse by 2 new developments we saw in the following seasons. Firstly, the rune and mastery systems were reworked in League, which gave more tankiness, damage, and utility to basically every champion in-game. The only instances we'd seen Teemo being played up until now were when he could confidently take Flash and Ignite, as his big strength was that overpowering damage over time. Well, when other champions began getting more damage or had an easier time tanking and surviving his harass from these new runes and masteries, flat damage dealers like Teemo didn't have much use anymore. The other thing that really turned into a final nail in the coffin for Teemo's longevity was the release of newer, more modern champions who could do his job just as well, if not better, the biggest example being Gnar. Released in 2014, Gnar was basically a better version of Teemo, a champion who was still a ranged harasser in laning phase with movement speed for kiting and the ability to escape tough situations, but someone who also had a lot of usefulness in the mid and late game as a team-fighting tank with his transformation ability. Once Gnar was put into the game, people started thinking, why would you ever play Teemo instead of Gnar as long as Gnar is available to you? Well, it turned out you could actually use Teemo for one thing. You could use him to counterpick Gnar. When Teemo finally did make a return top lane more than 4 years later at this point, he was picked 3 times in a row as a counter to Gnar. A Korean top laner named Shy, not the Shy, that's a different guy, he picked him against Longzhu's Expression once when playing for CJ Entis in the 2016 Summer LCK split.
There he is! The little yodel!
Oh, the little rodent. You can see those,
Yeah!
those little smiles
Here we go,
on
guys.
the face of Longzhu, and we do officially have a Teemo in LCK.
The thought here was Gnar actually dealt less damage than Teemo in a straight up 1v1, so although he might be more useful later on in a game, Teemo should theoretically beat him in lane and could potentially set him behind enough to a point where he's effectively useless later on. This pick didn't really work out for CJ Entis though, as Shy went 0-2-1 in his Teemo match, losing the game. Another Korean top laner, Sumdae, would try it again in that very same LCK split with another Teemo pick up against another Gnar, this time representing KT Rolster when playing against Trace on Jin Air.
What?
Are you serious?
Alright, that's like legit.
I think that's legit.
I think it is.
Here, he'd do much better, getting a final scoreline of 2-1-4, but would ultimately lose as well. Later on, these players would claim that it was an accident that they picked Teemo, suggesting they were actually trying to swap to other characters, but that the League client bugged out and didn't allow them to do so. I don't really believe that, as in the first game especially, they had plenty of time to make a selection. I think these guys actually wanted to try and take advantage of the counterpick matchup, which we would see a third player trying to do so shortly afterward. Just 2 weeks later, in the North American LCS, Hauntzer would bring Teemo back to TSM as another counterpick against a third Gnar.
Also having the Gnar on top of it for the wall up.
Taking that time!
And he's gonna do it!
He would do worst of all though, going 1-5-1 and would lose as well. 3 losses in a row now with this supposed counterpick. At this point in League's history, the game had just begun evolving away from that old win lane win game adage that simply wasn't a viable strategy anymore. 1v1 solo kills almost never happened as a part of competitive play, as players were now too cautious and too good to let themselves get killed. Laning phase in general transformed into being much more about getting small CS leads or experience advantages that could be turned into threats with coordinated teamfights around objectives in the mid and late game. For the older champions who were only good at old strategies like 1v1ing, I mean, they were starting to become less and less effective even if they were picked into good matchups. Not just Teemo, but all these champions began fading from relevancy fast, both in pro play and solo queue. A character getting reworked, where Riot would give them a new, more modern kit with better abilities and mechanics, was pretty much the only hope these older champions had of ever being relevant again. As the years went by, more and more characters got these reworks to bring them back into viability with stronger, updated kits, but of course Teemo didn't. Although he got a few small buffs or updates to try and keep him relevant over the years, he remained functionally the exact same, as in a constantly changing world, he seemingly refused to change. Oddly enough, at this point Teemo had almost transformed from a terrifying, frustrating nightmare to face in solo queue to a symbol of how older champions in League were becoming more and more irrelevant with each passing day. A few players would continue trying to make him work though. A year later in 2017, Ion in the Japanese league would pick him, as well as Wonder in the LEC, but Teemo would just keep on racking up losses through the end of the year. By the start of 2018, it had been more than half a decade, almost 6 years, since Teemo had been picked top lane and won in a competitive game. We were approaching the possibility that he was someone who we might just not ever see played professionally again, until a hero emerged in the distance. Mateo Alejandro Adortegui Zamora, a League of Legends player from Uruguay who plays under the name Bugox, took up the mantle that nobody else wanted to take. In 2018, when playing for a team named Gaming, he would pick Teemo top in the Latin America North League, counterpicking Cho'Gath. Here, he had a chance to break a 6-year losing streak for Teemo top players, and he sure did his predecessors proud.
¿Qué pasa acá? Se lo roba, Se lo roba el Teemo. Se lo robó el Teemo, ya lo vi venir, se lo roba el Teemo.
Va a iniciar Solid Snake, buena onda de choque de parte del Reggie, se van a cargar al primero, muere el Shin rápidamente, Bugox se manda para adelante castigando con el Teemo, va a caer el Cho'Gath ante las garras.
Bugox went 4-1-8 on Teemo, pulling out the win and reviving the nearly dead champion, but he wasn't done there. Just 1 week later, he would pick him again, this time blind picking him in the LLN playoffs during a decisive Game 5 that would either advance his team or send them home packing.
Perdón. Y va a ser básicamente daño con autoataques, no hay mucho más, pero llega Reggie con la emboscada, la rotación hacia el carril central, debería morirse esta Camila, está la Q de parte del Teemo, destello ofensivo, 3, 4.
Ahí está.
Es demasiado, pareciera muy básico el juego, ¿no? Donde siempre van top y siempre consiguen el kill, ahí está la definitiva de parte
la ganó el Teemo,
Uy, la gana el Teemo, sí, la gana el Teemo, se va a cargar a el Scarner, Manta Raya no alcanza el daño, no tiene nada de daño todavía. Pisó longo, ¿y qué va a pasar? Se va a cargar una más, no, se va a morir, asesinato doble para el Teemo, se escapa Bugox ante las garras del Reggie, no te la creo, Kaijo, con un Teemo te pido, cantalos, Kaijo, cantalo.
GG, para GG, avanzan a las semifinales.
I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about this guy before making this video, but he is my new hero. With these wins, he showed us that old champions are never too dead to revive. He even confidently picked Teemo again later on in that very same playoff run, trying to counter another Cho'Gath top lane, but would sadly lose this time as his team was just a bit outmatched by their opponent's Rainbow 7. This was a beautiful sight to see though, a new pro willing to pick Teemo in multiple games in high pressure situations and actually succeeding at doing so. It might have just renewed an interest in the possibility of Teemo's usage as a counterpick champion, as just a few months later, we would see one of the best teams in the world playing him.
Uh-oh! We're doing it, guys! Teemo!
Team Griffin and their AD carry Viper, who at the time in 2018 you could very well argue were the best team in the world, they picked Teemo twice at AD carry as a counterpick to Ezreal and destroyed with him.
Making players bot side. Viper going to be taking up the turret as Tarzan. Lots of damage. Headbutt pulled. Max is definitely dead. Can they juggle the aggro though? As Viper, he's going to help pick up the second kill. Almost dies to the turret, but he survives. And Griffin, double kill bottom lane.
Double kill the Teemo lane. No kills to Teemo.
Can we call it bottom lane?
Alright, it might be an exaggeration to say they destroyed, because Viper would actually only go 1-1-2 and 0-0-3 in these two Teemo games, but Griffin would pick up wins in both of them, this time admitting that it was a serious pick as well. This would be followed up by a European AD carry in the Turkish league named Freeze, using Teemo to roll swap to top lane and counter a Dr. Mundo with great success, picking up another win for the champion, which is starting to make his match history look much better. Whether these were all isolated incidents, or whether Bugox had actually renewed a global interest in using this champion as a creative counter, this was beautiful to see. Possibly the oldest unchanged strategy in League that was on death's door had suddenly been brought back into the spotlight in multiple leagues across the world. Personally, I'll give Bugox the credit. He remains today as the only person alongside Rainman to pick Teemo in more than 3 competitive games. He currently has the last and most recent win with Teemo, picking him in the LLA as a counter to Corki top lane of all things. This is when he was on Isurus Gaming, who would win the LLA that year and go to Worlds 2019, the first time since Season 1 we saw a Teemo player get to Worlds. At the time of recording, Bugox is not contracted to a team, as he is currently a free agent. He most recently played for the Brazilian BRCC team Falcao and has been teamless as of May 2020. I'm not sure if he's been teamless for a while because he's considering retirement, or if he has limited international offers due to the pandemic or something, but I hope he keeps playing for a while. He's only 22 years old right now and might be the only player in competitive play willing to carry the Teemo torch for now. Other than Bugox, there have been a few circumstances where Teemo was picked top lane somewhat recently. In the 2019 Summer LST series in Southeast Asia, Shine picked Teemo against a Kennen top lane. This is a pretty strange counterpick, as ranged characters with crowd control like Kennen should do very well against Teemo and negate many of his strengths. Shine did end up losing that series with a final scoreline of 1-5-1. There have also been a couple of times when Teemo was picked in the LCL, the Russian league. Here, he was first picked by PvP Stasios in the 2019 Spring Split when Gambit Gaming faced off against Victus esports, that famous all-female League of Legends team. That team is kind of a story for another time, but here Gambit was able to get a win with Stasios getting a final scoreline of 6-1-3. It might be seen as a bit disrespectful with him playing Teemo into them, as if he can pick ridiculous champions and still get easy wins, but no hard feelings seem to occur, as hilariously enough, Victus' top laner Helma then picked Teemo when rematching Gambit the following LCL 2019 Summer Split. When they picked Teemo, however, they would not do quite as well, getting a loss, although Helma would get a decent enough final score of 5-5-0. The last time we saw Teemo being played was at the 2020 LEC Spring Split when Misfits Dan picked him as a counter to what he thought was going to be an Aatrox top lane.
Zed locked in for push. There's the Teemo! There's the Teemo!
Oh, how's Teemo into Aatrox?
But G2 actually swapped their picks around to play a Bard top lane against that Teemo instead, and ended up winning a somewhat hilarious and weird game. At the time of recording this video, that was the last time Teemo was picked in a premier event, a story that has now been 10 years in the making. At the end of the day, as cheesy as it may sound, I think Teemo has kind of turned into a representation of what we all love about League of Legends, at least when we see him in pro play. I mean, it's kind of ironic that the game's most hated devil has become a sort of beacon of hope for the dreams and aspirations of pocket pick players who still like seeing off-meta strategies on the competitive stage. Teemo is now a testament to the weird strategies that keep this game always feeling fresh and and exciting. He's someone that should be admired, a champion who is himself, even if nobody likes him. I mean, no matter what people say, he refuses to change and demands that the world mold itself to accept who he is, regardless of how others feel. And pro players who take a risk on still trying to make this old kit work, they should be celebrated, since, as frustrating as he is, he might now best represent the spirit of all those old champions and strategies that everyone else has long forgotten. He might only be played as a meme at this point, but he has turned into the ultimate off-meta pick who reminds us that everybody, no matter how small, deserves some time in the spotlight. If Boogox isn't signed soon, then I'm a little bit worried about the future for competitive Teemo. He might not be played for another 5 years, and it might be even longer before he gets his next win. If there's no pro currently willing to take up that mantle of Teemo guy soon, we might not see another hero who's willing to do so for another generation of professionals, or even 2, but I'm sure Teemo will always be out there. No matter how much the League of Legends changes, I seriously doubt that Teemo ever will. His playstyle will always remain the exact same, as he'll always be somewhere in this game, remaining who he is until the end of time. Thank you very much for watching.